blackmail. This is a story about how silence protects the abuser, never the victim. Did you know that the average family secret is kept for 19 years before being revealed? 19 years. That's nearly 2 decades of lies, manipulation, and silent suffering. But what happens when someone else discovers that secret and decides to use it as a weapon against your own family? I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty, trust, and the lengths people will go to control others. This is the story of how my sister's abusive husband held my brother's darkest secret hostage for over 20 years, using it to manipulate, control, and destroy lives. What would you do if you discovered that someone you trusted was hiding something so devastating it could ruin everything? What would you do if that same person was being blackmailed by someone who was supposed to protect them? And what would you do if you realized you were the only one who could stop it? By the end of this video, you'll understand how one man's cruelty created a web of lies that nearly destroyed 3 lives. You'll learn how a single moment from decades ago became a tool of psychological torture. And you'll discover how sometimes the only way to save your family is to risk losing them forever. This isn't just another true crime story from Reddit. This is personal. This is about my family. And trust me when I tell you, the truth is more twisted and heartbreaking than you could ever imagine. If you're new here and you enjoy deep dive true crime stories that explore the darkest corners of human nature, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to share with you will stay with you long after this video ends. Let me start by telling you about the phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in March, and I was cooking dinner when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my sister's name, but when I answered, all I could hear was sobbing. Not just crying, the kind of sobbing that comes from years of suppressed pain finally breaking free. "He knows," she whispered through her tears. "He's always known, and he's been using it against us this whole time." To understand what she meant, I need to take you back 23 years to when our family was whole and happy, before the secrets, before the manipulation, before everything fell apart.
I'm the oldest of 3 siblings. My brother Jake is the middle child, and my sister Emma is the youngest. We grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and your reputation was everything. Our parents raised us to be close, to protect each other, to always have each other's backs, no matter what.
Jake was the golden boy, star athlete, honor roll student, the kind of kid every parent dreams of having. He had scholarships lined up, college recruiters calling the house weekly, and a bright future ahead of him. Emma was the baby, the one we all protected and cherished. She was sweet, trusting, and saw the best in everyone. That trust would eventually be her downfall. When Emma was 22, she met David at a coffee shop near the university, where she was finishing her degree. He was charming, well-dressed, and seemed genuinely interested in her life and dreams. He asked about her family constantly, wanted to meet us, wanted to be part of our tight-knit group. Looking back, those should have been red flags. But at the time, we thought it was sweet. We thought he loved her so much that he wanted to know everything about her world. The first time I met David, something felt off. He was too smooth, too calculated in his responses. He asked pointed questions about our family history, our childhood stories, our past mistakes and triumphs. But Emma was glowing with happiness, and we wanted her to be happy. Jake was more suspicious than I was. He pulled me aside after that first family dinner and said, "There's something about this guy I don't trust. He's collecting information, not just making conversation." But Emma was in love. And when you're in love, you don't want to hear that the person you care about might not be who they seem. Little did we know that while we were welcoming him into the family, he was already planning how to use what he'd learned against us. What I'm about to tell you about this man will make your skin crawl, because it shows just how methodical and calculated true psychological abuse can be. David didn't start with physical violence. He was too smart for that. Instead, he began with small things. Comments about Emma's appearance that seemed like compliments, but were actually criticisms. "You'd look so much prettier if you lost just a few pounds. Your sister always dresses so much more professionally than you do. Maybe you should consider a different career path, something more suitable for someone like you."
He isolated her slowly. First, he convinced her to move in with him across town.
Then he suggested she didn't need to call us as often. We were too involved in her life, he said. He wanted her all to himself. Wasn't that romantic? He monitored her phone calls, her emails, her social media. He convinced her that we didn't approve of him, that we were trying to break them up. He created problems where none existed, and then positioned himself as the solution. But the most insidious part was how he gathered information. During family gatherings, he would ask innocent questions about our past. What was Jake like in high school? Did he ever get into any trouble? What about college? Any wild stories there? We thought he was just trying to get to know us better. We had no idea he was building a profile, looking for weaknesses, searching for something he could use. And then, about 6 months into their relationship, he found it. It was at a family barbecue. Jake had had a few beers, and David had been particularly attentive that day, asking about Jake's college years. Somehow, the conversation turned to regrets, to mistakes we'd all made, and Jake, feeling comfortable and trusting, shared something he'd never told anyone outside the family. The moment Jake finished talking, I saw David's expression change. It was subtle, just a slight shift in his eyes, a barely perceptible smile. But I knew even then that something significant had just happened. Within weeks, David proposed to Emma. She was over the moon, planning their future together. But I noticed that Jake had become distant, withdrawn. When I asked him about it, he just said he was dealing with some stress at work. I had no idea that David had already approached him privately. I had no idea that the blackmail had already begun. But the secret he was holding over our heads, it was something that could have destroyed my brother's entire life, and he knew it. Now, before I reveal what that secret was, I need you to understand something about my brother. Jake wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he was a good person. He was the kind of man who would give you the shirt off his back, who would drop everything to help a friend in need. He was studying to be a teacher because he wanted to make a difference in kids' lives. But 23 years ago, when he was in college, Jake made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. It was his junior year, and he was struggling. The pressure of maintaining his grades while working 2 part-time jobs to pay for school was overwhelming. His longtime girlfriend had just broken up with him, and he was dealing with depression that he didn't know how to handle. Mental health wasn't something people talked about openly back then. He was at a party one night trying to forget his problems when he met Sarah. She was a freshman, barely 18, and she was drunk, very drunk. Jake wasn't much better off. He'd been drinking heavily that night, trying to numb the pain he was feeling. What happened next is something Jake has regretted every single day for the past 23 years. They ended up back at his apartment. Sarah was so intoxicated that she could barely stand, but Jake was too drunk and too wrapped up in his own pain to recognize how wrong the situation was. Or maybe he did recognize it, but he was too selfish to stop. They had sex. Sarah passed out immediately afterward. When Jake woke up the next morning and saw her lying there, he realized what he had done. He realized that she had been too drunk to consent, that he had taken advantage of someone who couldn't make that decision. Sarah left without saying a word to him. She never reported it. She never pressed charges. But Jake knew. He knew that what he had done was wrong, and the guilt ate at him every single day. He told our parents immediately. He was ready to turn himself in to face whatever consequences were coming. But our father, God rest his soul, convinced him that it would destroy his future, that it would ruin his chances of becoming a teacher, of making a positive impact on the world. "You made a terrible mistake," our father said, "but destroying your life won't undo what happened. The best thing you can do now is learn from this and spend the rest of your life making sure you never hurt anyone again." So Jake kept quiet. He finished college, became a teacher, and dedicated his life to protecting and nurturing children. He never drank again. He went to therapy. He became a better man because of his mistake. Not in spite of it, but the secret remained. And 23 years later, it was still powerful enough to destroy everything he had built. The secret involves someone who trusted my brother completely, and what happened next would haunt him for the next 2 decades. After 20 years of silence, I can finally tell you what really happened that night, and more importantly, what happened after David learned about it. The full truth is that Jake's encounter with Sarah wasn't just a drunken mistake, it was sexual assault. Jake was too intoxicated to realize it at the time, but as he sobered up and reflected on what had happened, he understood that Sarah had been incapacitated. She couldn't consent. What he had done was rape. The legal implications were serious. Even 20 years later, there might not be a statute of limitations on such a crime. Socially, the revelation would destroy not just Jake's career as a teacher, but his entire reputation in our small community. The man who had dedicated his life to protecting children would be exposed as someone who had once taken advantage of a vulnerable young woman. But the context matters, and this is what David used to his advantage. Jake was genuinely remorseful. He had spent 2 decades trying to make amends through his actions. Even though he could never directly apologize to Sarah, he didn't even know her last name, and our parents had advised against trying to find her, saying it would only cause more pain. Jake had gone to therapy, had dedicated his life to education and protecting children, had never touched another drink. He had become a better person because of his mistake. But David didn't care about any of that. David saw only opportunity. The cover-up hadn't been malicious. Our parents genuinely believed they were protecting their son from a mistake that would ruin his life. They thought that keeping it secret and ensuring Jake learned from it was the right thing to do. Our mother made Jake promise that he would never put himself in a situation like that again, and he kept that promise. Only our immediate family knew. Our parents, Jake, Emma, and me. We never spoke about it openly, but it was always there. A shadow hanging over our family gatherings, a weight that Jake carried in his shoulders, a sadness that never quite left his eyes. When David heard this story at that barbecue, when Jake shared his deepest regret with what he thought was family, David saw it for what it was, the perfect weapon. But here's where the story takes a truly sinister turn. What this man did with this information is beyond anything I could have imagined, because he turned Jake's genuine remorse and growth into a tool of psychological torture. The first time David used the secret as leverage was just 2 weeks after Jake had confided in him. Jake received a text message. "We need to talk. Tonight. Come alone." They met at a diner outside of town. David was calm, almost cheerful. He ordered coffee and pie like they were just two brothers-in-law having a friendly chat. Then he leaned across the table and said, "I know what you did to that girl in college. I know you're a rapist." Jake's blood ran cold. He tried to explain the context, the remorse, the changes he'd made, but David cut him off. "I don't care about your sob story," David said. "What I care about is that you're a respected teacher in this community. And if people knew what you really were, it would destroy everything. Your career, your reputation, your family standing in this town, everything." Then came the demand. David wanted money, not a fortune, just enough to make Jake feel the squeeze. $500 a month. "Consider it insurance," David said. "Insurance that your secret stays safe." Jake paid. What choice did he have? He was a teacher. He barely made enough to support himself as it was. But $500 a month was manageable, and it was a small price to pay to protect his family from the shame and his students from the scandal. But David wasn't satisfied with just money. That was never the real goal. Within months, the financial demands escalated. David needed help with his rent. He needed money for Emma's engagement ring. He needed cash for their wedding, always with the same threat lurking underneath. You wouldn't want Emma to know what kind of man her brother really is, would you? But the psychological manipulation was even worse than the financial extortion. David began controlling Jake's behavior in subtle ways. He discouraged Jake from spending too much time with Emma. You wouldn't want to influence her with your history, would you? He criticized Jake's career choices. Teaching seems like an odd choice for someone with your background. He made Jake feel like he didn't deserve happiness, didn't deserve love, didn't deserve forgiveness. Every family gathering became a minefield, with David making subtle comments that only Jake would understand. "Jake's so good with children," he would say with a knowing smile. "I wonder where that comes from." The ripple effect was devastating. Jake's mental health deteriorated rapidly. He became withdrawn, stopped dating, stopped socializing. His teaching suffered because he was constantly anxious, constantly looking over his shoulder. He developed insomnia, lost weight, and started having panic attacks. But the worst part was how it affected his relationship with Emma. David convinced her that Jake was jealous of their relationship, that he was trying to come between them. When Jake tried to warn Emma about David's true nature, David was always one step ahead. "Your brother said some concerning things about me," David would tell Emma. "I think he might be projecting his own issues onto our relationship." Emma, caught between the brother she loved and the man she was planning to marry, began to distance herself from Jake. She thought he was being overprotective, jealous, paranoid. She had no idea that her fiancé was systematically destroying her brother's life. Meanwhile, I watched my brother disappear before my eyes. The confident, happy man I had grown up with became a shell of himself. When I asked him what was wrong, he would just say he was dealing with work stress. I had no idea that he was being blackmailed by his own brother-in-law. And then after 15 years of this torture, something happened that made everything infinitely worse. This is when I realized that my brother-in-law wasn't just abusive, he was evil. The escalation event happened during Emma and David's 15th wedding anniversary celebration. We were all gathered at their house, and David had been drinking. He was in a particularly cruel mood that night, making jokes that seemed harmless to everyone else but cut Jake to the bone. "Remember when Jake was single for so long? David said, raising his glass. I used to wonder if he'd ever find someone, but I guess some people just aren't meant to be in relationships. Jake excused himself to the bathroom, and I followed him. I found him having a panic attack, gasping for air, his hands shaking uncontrollably. I can't do this anymore, he whispered. I can't keep living like this. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just about being single or work stress. This was about something much darker. But before I could get Jake to talk to me, David's demands escalated again. He wanted more money, a lot more money. He was starting a business, he said, and he needed Jake to co-sign for a loan, $50,000. Jake didn't have that kind of money. He was a teacher living paycheck to paycheck, already stretched thin from years of monthly payments, to David. When he said he couldn't do it, David's response was chilling. Then, I guess it's time for your secret to come out, David said. I'm sure the school board would be very interested to know they have a rapist teaching their children. But David didn't stop there. He threatened to tell Emma the truth, but not the real truth, his version of the truth. He would tell her that Jake had confided in him about being a serial predator, that he'd been covering for him all these years out of loyalty to family. He would make Jake look like a monster and himself look like a hero. Who do you think she'll believe? David asked. Her loving husband or her creepy brother who's been acting strange for years? Jake was trapped. He considered suicide, actually planned it out. He wrote letters to all of us, explaining everything, apologizing for the pain he'd caused. He was going to drive to the lake where we used to swim as kids and end it all. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the thought of leaving Em alone with David. Maybe it was the realization that his death would only give David more power over our family. Or maybe it was just pure stubbornness, the refusal to let David win. Instead, Jake made a different decision. He called me. I need to tell you something, he said. And after I tell you, you're going to hate me. But I can't keep living with this secret anymore. That's when I made a decision that would either save my family or destroy us all forever. I knew I had one chance to end this nightmare, and it was going to require everything I had. When Jake told me everything, the original incident, the years of blackmail, the escalating threats, I felt like I was seeing clearly for the first time in 20 years. All of David's behavior, all of Jake's withdrawal, all of the family tensions suddenly made sense. My first instinct was rage. I wanted to confront David immediately, to expose him for the manipulative monster he was. But I knew that would only make things worse. David was too smart, too prepared. He would spin the story, make himself the victim, and destroy Jake in the process. Instead, I realized that the secret's power was entirely artificial. Yes, what Jake had done 23 years ago was wrong. Yes, it had serious legal and social implications. But Jake was no longer that person. He had spent 2 decades making amends through his actions, becoming a better man, protecting and nurturing children instead of harming them. The shame and guilt that David had weaponized against Jake were based on who Jake had been at his lowest moment, not who he had become. And the only way to break David's hold over our family was to take away his weapon by telling the truth ourselves. I started by consulting with a lawyer friend of mine. I needed to understand the legal implications of what Jake had done, what the statute of limitations was, and what protections might be available to him. The news was mixed. There could still be legal consequences, but they would likely be minimal given the amount of time that had passed and Jake's clean record since then. Next, I reached out to a therapist who specialized in trauma and family dynamics. I needed to understand how to handle this revelation in a way that would protect Emma and support Jake through what was coming. Then I began building a support system. I talked to our closest family friends, our pastor, and a few of Jake's colleagues who I knew would stand by him. I didn't tell them the details, that would be Jake's choice, but I prepared them for the possibility that our family was about to go through a very difficult time. The hardest part was convincing Jake that this was the right path. He was terrified, not just of the legal consequences, but of losing Emma, of destroying his career, of facing the judgment of our community. What if everyone turns against me, he asked. Some people might, I admitted, but the people who matter, the people who know who you are now, they'll stand by you. And more importantly, you'll be free. David won't have any power over you anymore. Jake was still hesitant, but I could see the hope in his eyes. For the first time in years, he was considering the possibility of a life without fear. The confrontation strategy was simple, but dangerous. I would approach David first, let him know that we were planning to tell the truth, and give him one chance to come clean to Emma about his abuse. If he refused, we would proceed with our plan. I knew it was risky. David might escalate his threats, might try to destroy Jake before we had a chance to control the narrative. But I also knew that doing nothing was no longer an option. But when I finally confronted him with my plan, his reaction was something I never could have prepared for. After 20 years of lies, manipulation, and abuse, the truth was finally going to be told. I met David at his office, neutral territory, where he couldn't control the environment. He was expecting me to ask about Emma, maybe plan a surprise party, or coordinate a family event. Instead, I sat down across from his desk and said, "I know what you've been doing to Jake." For just a moment, his mask slipped. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the rapid assessment of how much I knew and how much damage I could do. Then the mask snapped back into place, and he gave me that same charming smile he'd been using for 20 years. "I'm not sure what you mean," he said. 20 years of blackmail," I continued. 20 years of psychological torture. 20 years of using my brother's guilt against him. It ends now. David leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from confusion to amusement. "And what exactly do you think you can do about it? If Jake's secret comes out, he loses everything. His job, his reputation, his freedom. Are you really willing to destroy your brother to hurt me?" "Jake's secret doesn't have the power you think it does," I said. "Not anymore. We're going to tell the truth. All of it. What Jake did, what you've been doing, everything." That's when David's composure finally cracked. His face contorted with rage, and for the first time I saw the monster that Emma had been living with for 20 years. "You have no idea what you're playing with," he snarled. "I will destroy him. I will destroy all of you. When I'm done, Jake won't just lose his job. He'll be in prison, and Emma will hate you for taking away the only person who ever protected her from the truth about her disgusting brother." But his threats felt hollow now. I had seen behind the curtain, and I knew that his power was based entirely on fear and secrecy. Take those away and he was just a pathetic man who had spent 20 years tormenting his own family. The family meeting was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. We gathered at my house, Jake, Emma, and me. David wasn't invited, though I knew he would hear about it soon enough. Emma was confused and angry. She didn't understand why Jake looked so terrified, why I had insisted on this meeting, why David wasn't there. When I told her we needed to talk about something important, something that would change everything, she immediately went on the defensive. "Is this about David again?" she demanded. "Are you still trying to convince me that he's some kind of monster?" "Emma," I said gently, "I need you to listen to what Jake has to say. Really listen, and then you can decide what you want to do with the information." Jake's voice was barely above a whisper as he began to speak. He told her about the incident in college, about the guilt he'd carried for 23 years, about the blackmail, about the escalating threats. He told her about the panic attacks, the sleepless nights, the constant fear that had consumed his life. Emma's reaction was not what any of us expected. She didn't scream or cry or storm out. She just sat there, very still, processing what she had heard. When Jake finished speaking, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I know." We stared at her in shock. "What do you mean? You know?" I asked. "I've known about David's abuse for years," she said quietly. "I've known that he was controlling and manipulative. I've known that something was wrong with our family dynamics. I just didn't know what he was holding over Jake's head." She looked at Jake with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry he did this to you. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." The public revelation was anticlimactic compared to the emotional devastation of that family meeting. Jake decided to tell his principal and the school board himself before David could use the information against him. The response was mixed. Some people were supportive, others were judgmental. Jake ultimately decided to retire early, not because he was forced to, but because he wanted to start fresh somewhere new. David's downfall was swift and complete. Once Emma understood the full extent of his manipulation, she filed for divorce. Without his hold over Jake, he had no leverage, no power. He tried to spread rumors about our family, but nobody believed him. He was revealed for what he truly was, a manipulative abuser who had tormented his own family for decades. What happened next proved that the truth really can set you free, but not without a cost. The secret that had controlled our lives for 20 years was finally powerless. The immediate consequences were significant. Jake lost his job, though he found another position at a private school in a different state, a school that was more interested in who he was now than who he had been 23 years ago. Emma went through a difficult divorce, but she was finally free from David's manipulation and abuse. Our family had to rebuild from the ground up. The trust that had been broken by years of secrets and lies had to be carefully reconstructed. We started family therapy, all three of us together, working through the trauma and the pain, but the long-term impact was overwhelmingly positive. Jake, free from the constant fear and guilt, began to heal. He started dating again, made new friends, rediscovered his passion for teaching. He even reached out to a support group for people who had committed sexual assault, working to understand his actions and make amends in whatever way he could. Emma, freed from David's control, flourished. She went back to school, started a new career, and eventually met someone who treated her with the respect and love she deserved. She also became an advocate for abuse survivors, using her experience to help other women recognize the signs of manipulation and control. As for me, I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to let them continue living in shame and fear. I learned that secrets only have the power we give them, and that the truth, no matter how difficult, is always better than living a lie. David disappeared from our lives completely. We heard through mutual friends that he moved to another state, where he presumably found new victims to torment. We reported his history of abuse to local authorities, but there was little they could do without concrete evidence of criminal activity. The legal outcomes were minimal. Jake was never charged with any crime. Too much time had passed, and there was no complaint from the victim. But more importantly, he found peace with himself. He couldn't undo what had happened 23 years ago, but he could control how he moved forward. Our family's new beginning was built on honesty, transparency, and genuine love. Not the fake love that David had used to manipulate us, but the real love that survives difficult truths. Looking back on this 20-year nightmare, there are lessons that everyone needs to hear. Secrets can become weapons in the hands of the wrong people. David turned Jake's genuine remorse into a tool of torture, using it to control not just Jake, but our entire family. He understood that shame is one of the most powerful emotions, and he weaponized it for his own gain. But secrets only have power when they're kept in the dark. The moment we brought Jake's truth into the light, David lost his leverage. The thing that had controlled our lives for 20 years suddenly became just a part of Jake's history. A difficult part, but not a defining one. The importance of truth and transparency cannot be overstated. Yes, the truth was painful. Yes, it had consequences. But living with lies and manipulation was infinitely worse. The truth allowed Jake to heal, allowed Emma to escape her abuser, and allowed our family to rebuild on a foundation of honesty. We also learned the difference between family loyalty and enabling. For years, we thought we were protecting Jake by keeping his secret. In reality, we were giving David the ammunition he needed to destroy us all. True protection comes from standing together against those who would harm us, not from hiding in shame. Finally, we learned to recognize the signs of manipulation and abuse. David's tactics weren't unique. They're used by abusers everywhere. The isolation, the gradual erosion of self-worth, the use of secrets and shame as weapons, these are tools that manipulative people use to maintain control. If this story has taught us anything, it's that silence protects the abuser, never the victim. If you're living with a secret that someone is using against you, please know that you're not alone. The shame and fear you feel are real, but they don't have to control your life. The truth is always more powerful than the lies people tell to keep you trapped. If you're in an abusive relationship, whether it's physical, emotional, or psychological, please reach out for help. David's tactics are not uncommon. Abusers often use information, secrets, and shame to maintain control over their victims. But there are people who can help you break free, people who will believe you and support you. And if you're watching this and thinking about someone in your life who might be experiencing manipulation or abuse, don't wait. Reach out to them. Let them know they're not alone. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let someone continue living in fear. What would you have done in this situation? Have you ever experienced manipulation like this? Have you ever had to choose between protecting a secret and protecting the people you love? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the power of truth and the danger of secrets, please hit that subscribe button and share it with others who might need to hear it. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply tell our stories and let others know they're not alone. Remember, the truth will set you free. It may not be easy and it may not be without consequences, but it's always better than living a lie. Thank you for listening to my family story. Thank you for being part of a community that values truth, healing, and justice. And remember, You are stronger than your secrets, and you deserve to live a life free from fear.